everybody. We will start in a moment our meeting with Keren, an Israeli artist. Because artist, I think, is the best word, not a comic book creator.
No, I like comic book creator.
Okay.
Any chance to say the word comic?
Oh, that's true, because you're also an activist, because you promote really actively comic as a medium.
Yeah, but I think it's part of being a cartoonist. It's not just I started making comics so I can be in the comics world, and I don't think I can separate drawing comics and reading comics and collecting comics and teaching comics because for me it's all part of the same. It's not different. And I publish comics as a publisher. With a collective of people, and I think it's in my interest that there will be as much comics in the world. So I try to make it, and I really believe in it.
That's so great. Those are great words to hear them in here, where we have this big collection of comic books. So welcome in our library with all the comics.
Thank you so much.
Feel free to run through it.
How?
Feel free to run through it afterwards.
I definitely will.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Let me start it officially. I have with me Keren Katz, who came with a lot of difficulties from Israel. But we have you today, and I'm very glad we do. Like I started to say, you're a comic book creator, a cartoonist artist. You work in a bookshop, and you promote comic books very actively.
Yes.
You dance.
Yes.
You perform.
Yes.
And what you can see behind me is one of your works, kind of a double meaning of both of your work, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was asked to prepare some slides, so they're not in a very specific there's no specific order, but it's just a mix of the things that I am involved with, which is performance, dance, publishing comics as part of a collective, making comics myself, theater. I recently started learning puppetry, and I'm working on a children's play, and I started learning to become a clown, but the big word for all of it is storytelling, I think. And part of the reason that I do all the things that are not strictly drawing in a room is so I have stories to tell. So the more I do wild things in the world, the more things I have to write about.
And I must say, I'm in love with your stories. And I really like how they are quite abstract, but about walking around a city or walking around a school, about people meeting each other, and about space as well.
Yes, I usually write in the back of all the books that they're all stories of unrequited love in dangerous architectural spaces. And it stems, the space part of it, I brought these slides which actually represent the way I view the pages as more of, there's a lot of negative space in all of my drawings, and it's to do with a combination of three things. One is the fact that I used to dance from age 4 till I was 18, ballet, and I miss it the most in the world. I dream about it every night, and I wish I could dance. And so when I stopped dancing, the only thing I could do is write about it, and I see the comics not as a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end, although it does have it. It does have a story with characters, but the story is secondary to the fact that they're all choreographies. So my intention with all of my books, I have these graphic novels, is that I leave enough space in them and enough abstract, and I draw a lot of spaces, in order for performing the book and maybe even doing multiple versions of the same book. So it's like I'm planning a future choreography. And the other thing is very technical. Because I started drawing very late in life, I don't draw very well.
That's not true. That's so much not true.
No, I mean the realistic version of drawing. I have, and it's not just in drawing. I'm full of scars of banging into walls, and I never understand where I'm going, and I have this problem with space. I don't know, I can't remember left or right. And even when I look at things, and I try very, very hard to focus on how a space is organized and translate it to the page, it breaks. And so the spaces are always in a strange perspective, and there's always people's limbs and the way they move are actually more rigid and geometrical than the physical objects themselves or the walls, like in this one.
People always look like they are in the middle of fall or something is happening to them.
Yeah.
But that's actually the idea of the academic hour, right?
Yeah, the academic hour is this book. It's my first graphic novel, and it takes place in a school where all the rooms move constantly, and it's kind of influenced by Arabian Night, 1001 Arabian Nights, where the storyteller, it's an idea that I love, that the narrator of the stories is able to save her own life by promising that tomorrow will be a new story. And that's how she preserves herself. And I really adhere to that notion of storytelling as the thing that helps us adhere to an unstable environment, and as something that the story and the imagination and the intangible things actually are more form the more stable connections between us than the spaces we are in. Like, more than we're in the same room, we're also in some kind of love of comics or love of storytelling, and that's more important. And so the academic hour is also autobiographical in the sense that it tells the story of a very powerful story that I have, that it's based on my art school that in Bezalel in Jerusalem, which is on a mountain. And because it's on the mountain, then the floor, the 7th floor is lower than the 4th floor, because it goes like this. And I could never find the rooms in time. And there's only one advantage to being late to classes, and for the long and winding getting lost, is that there is a chance that to fall in love. And specifically, I mean that there's a story of a girl who's in love with a boy in her class, and they have to get to room 1001, and they can't find it. And the girl hopes that it's a long enough walk so he might fall in love with her on the way there. And she keeps telling him more and more stories on the way there to get him to fall in love with her. And it's exactly what happened the night I met Iran, my husband. He wanted to walk me home, and I told him I lived in an address that was really far away and was not my home. And I was hoping that by the time we get there, he'll fall in love with me. But I didn't plan it correctly, and when we got there, he noticed that I didn't have a key because it was not my house, and then he didn't speak to me for 3 months because he thought I was crazy, and he was right.
But eventually it worked.
Yeah, eventually it worked. But this is just the personal side of it. I think this is how I think of stories, is that and why I love comics as a medium, and why I think I do a lot of things that are not directly cartooning, and I prefer the community of comics and creating comics and and using it to form a community via publishing and festivals like this one, because I think it's a medium that's very open. There's a lot of open ends, even to a book that's already printed. There's so many ways to read it and so many ways to respond to it. And it's never ending, unlike maybe other linear forms of art. And even though it's most cartoonists I know, and me myself, when I draw, I like to be alone in a dark room and concentrate. I do think that the space that is made by the intricate layers of the medium, the way that you can decipher it in so many ways, and even the potential of discourse around it, even if it takes place in singular people reading the comic that they got alone in their room, there's still like this abstract discourse around it. I think that is the storytelling potential is the thing that excites me. The potential of there will be another story and we can start anew and we can pick up this thread, and that's why I like to leave things open.
But also the potential of being heard, of being seen, right? What really struck me when I read those two books at once, because I knew them, but now I read those two at the same time, and both have this question asked by the girl who tries somebody who, well, is in this kind of a love relationship. She asks the boy, "Are you watching?"
Oh yeah, yes. That's me. I'm at the same. That's okay. So when you read these, they wouldn't. Okay, I should start over. My comics idols are autobiographical writers. For instance, Gabrielle Bell. And I'm blacking out, but Liana Fink. I really would like, the same way I would like to draw space as it is, I really want to tell a story from start to finish. I really want to use it to express things, because I feel that in person I always have trouble communicating, and comics is first and foremost my way of forming connections. But I can't. I sit down and I write it, and all the words get mixed up, so I'm kind of hiding behind the abstract in order to I try to justify it, because I also really love reading comics that has that's like a detective or mystery book, and I admire all the books that have a start, a beginning, and an end. But I can't, and so. I say my comics are autobiographical, even though they read as completely surrealist and abstract, because the autobiographical aspect is just this notion of at the center of it is I want to be watched, I want to be seen, and were you watching is very. It's like I'm ashamed of wanting this. This is my desire, but I have this exhibitionist fantasy, which is why I do all these theatrical things. And also, I think it's here it is, my voice. And also, I think it's connected to I had a dream since I was 4, because I was doing ballet. I had a dream of being on stage and being a ballerina, and that dream was crushed. And so now I want it again, but at the same time, I think that it's not a desire that I only wish for myself, for my own self to be seen. I wish for it. I wish this medium to be accessible to a lot of people, and that's why we started publishing comics as well. And our mission is to publish every book that wouldn't otherwise get published, and we support young artists. and I teach comics, and I want to make it available for people as a tool for expression. And also on the political side, even though I don't do actual political work, I think through comics education or through the education of art education, it's the most important thing for people to feel that they can tell a story and they can be seen, especially coming from a place where to say people are getting crushed is an understatement. A place where there is absolutely, well, I mean, I don't know how much of the news is getting out, but the democracy is in grave danger, and and so is culture, and so is art education, and so are all those things that are the first to go. So it's all those things I think are embodied in this medium. And where you're watching is also kind of a sad thing to say, because it means that things for me feel one-sided. That it's a question that doesn't, it's a desire, but that's why I say it's unrequited. It's a desire, but I'm fantasizing about it. I'm not necessarily getting seen. And if I do, it's through the performance aspect. It's not the real me. It's me in a costume, or me performing something, and that's what people see, but yeah. So yeah, that's I guess the theme of both these books.
I know that when it comes to democracy going away, or the education being restricted, the culture being restricted, we can totally relate to that as well in Poland. So one of the things that I really love in those books is also this feeling of freedom, of this ability to just walk through the educational spaces, through those schools, just meet people, talk to them, just being there. Without any fear of somebody going out and telling you, no, you shouldn't be here, you should be somewhere else, you should, study this and that. It's so out of linear, out of restricted.
But what is the question?
Oh, that's just a comment. Oh. The question is, because when we spoke before, you said that, when we spoke on Messenger, you said that really for you, even though it is an important topic, right? You don't think that comic books or art, maybe not, maybe I'm exaggerating, is not really something that is directly reacting, or is directly taking, stating something in political sense.
Oh. Oh yeah, when we chatted, yeah. Well, what I meant to this is. You were asking me, we were chatting a little bit before. I do think there is, political comics is a thing, and journalistic comics is a thing. But the interesting thing, this is getting into comics history and contemporary comics in Israel. I must disclaim that I am by no means an academic. So what I'm saying is purely from my perception of it. What is happening is you were asking, due to the current political state in Israel and all the protests, it would be interesting to give examples of political comics and the situation getting expressed in comics. And I told you that the thing about comics in Israel is that there's very little of it. And usually these projects are, and I have some examples that I will flip through. The comic shelf right now is made up of mostly books, graphic novels, and they're usually, the artist doesn't have a lot of funding to do it, if not no funding. And they work on it for a very, very long time. And so and so if you're working on a project like this for 5 years, the contemporary part or the daily part doesn't get into this work. So it's relating to politics in a broader sense. For instance, in this project,
which is also very important, I would say. Not
Yeah, yeah,
only
yeah.
reacting, but discussing.
yeah,
something.
not reacting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you would expect Israel is obsessed with news. Everybody looks at the news every half hour. We get alerts that we hear bombs in the sky. We're 37 miles from Gaza. We see soldiers in our midst all the time. There's no separation between the military state and Israel. It's constantly there. We all are part of this very militaristic society, and it's suffocating. So you would expect that this seeps into comics, but it's more. The situation is more that we are in the streets ourselves. For instance, the past 4 months, twice a week, there are protests in the street. There are hundreds of thousands of people. And so because we're in it in our person, and we talk to each other, and we're on the same side of the political map, there's no need to even express it through comics. We just talk it. And I think comics is too. It takes too long, and the daily life is the daily life. It's in our flesh and blood. So the books have, and on the other hand, we were born into the situation. It's much more visible now, but the state of occupation and the violence has been there since we were born, and generations before us. So it necessarily seeps in. The famous example I can think of, the most famous cartoonist in Israel right now is Rutu Modan. And Rutu works on her books about an average of 5 years at a time. And you can see politics in all of her books. The Israeli politics seep into it, but it's via the story. The story is important, and I may be misquoting her, but she was my teacher, and I think the strong sense about what she's saying is that more important than the specific political aspect, which could maybe possibly divide the readers, she wants to use the medium's ability to see someone from someone's perspective and a point of view, and the medium's qualities are the politics that are most important. The ability to listen to the story, to get into a character's mindset, and the most interesting thing I think about Israel is that it's Joe Sacco, who is an American journalist who wrote many books about Gaza and the war, and his books are very detailed and realistically drawn. Does more journalistic comics than all of the Israeli cartoonists combined. So I think outside there's the general journalistic comics. Because they come here and they report. But I think what I think I and some of my colleagues think is reporting is already done. It's there on black and white, printed in a newspaper. There's no need to do more reporting. There is, however, a very dire need, which I think I wish there was more of, but it's unfortunately, what I think is the most important thing is the Palestinian stories rise to the top. And we as Israelis are very, very limited to tell these Palestinian stories because we can only tell them from our perspective. And that perspective is very, very tilted because we are, by law and by also, we cannot, we don't have access. It's a strange, we're the closest people there but there's no access, and we can't do this thing that is probably the most intuitive thing to do. And also, if we do it, it would be kind of almost whitewashing it, because we would, if a comics collaboration took place, unlike maybe the American notion of diversity, where voices come in and they tell their stories, for us, this action of getting a story is almost like saying, hey, things are normal, look, we collaborated, there is peace. And that would be maybe harmful for the situation, and we need to scream that, no, the situation is not normal, there is violence, this is life and death, it has to be presented as there is something wrong, and it needs to be dealt with immediately. And filtering it through comics might dilute the urgency in a way. I don't know. It's very hard to explain, I guess. But
which is also a very interesting notion of respecting the story that lies there, but you are not entitled to take it for yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very interesting.
But the problem. I would never, I don't think we are entitled in general, but I do want to know, and it's very hard to know when no one is telling the story. I mean, there are stories, there are great Palestinian graphic novels and cartoonists published right now, but it's a handful where there should be a lot more.
Well, another thing is comic books. It's always just a handful, right?
Exactly.
Think about the Polish comic scene, the Israeli comic scene is just, several people doing their stuff, and that's it.
Yeah. I brought some examples of some cartoonists here.
There was something kind of violent showing a protest or war. So my question was also coming from the fact that we have Ruty Modan translated in Polish. We have Michał Kiczka translated in Polish.
Oh yeah.
But it feels like maybe what our publishers are interested in, maybe the public as well, is a bit more more political oriented, even if it's not directly about politics, and it's also about the Israeli-Polish dialogue or the lack of it at some point, or the war in general and Holocaust, which is old topics if you think about what is happening now.
Well, yeah. I just wanted to show, this is Michał Kiszka, if some of you have read his books. This is a secret project which will be published in this summer. I'm working on it with a few cartoonists and a photographer named Lila Chaz. And we're doing a photographic history of Israeli comics. And we're joking because Israeli comics is very little and minuscule, but we're referencing great works of art. But these are all cartoonists. This is me, and this is also me. And this is the Michał Kiszka, the first comics lesson to be taught in an Israeli academy in Jerusalem after Rembrandt. But to your question, speaking of Ruty Modan as an example. She was part of a collective that started in the 90s called Actus Tragicus. There are 5 amazing cartoonists, and what they wanted to, they published in English, and their styles were very kind of European. They did very like the European alternative scene and the American alternative scene, and they were the first ones to really go out of the more classical kind of minimalistic style of Israeli cartooning into luscious color prints and stuff like that. And Rutu was singled out from those 5, who are all amazing and there still are the leading professors in Israel and leading cartoonists themselves. But Rutu specifically was singled out because of one story that was published where they were all doing anthologies that were kind of gothic, with characters like Victor, and very surrealist, and a lot inspired by another author that I'm sure is published in Polish, Edgar Keren. And Rutu wrote a story that takes place in a kibbutz with a family waiting for their son to return from war. And they look at the sky. I can't remember exactly, but at one point a plane crashes right in the middle of...
It's published in Polish,
It's
also
Polish,
in
yeah.
Tamilti, in a collection of short stories.
And that was the first story where Drawn in Quarterly picked up, and they said, okay, this is something local, and we want that local voice because this is something we want to learn about, a different perspective. And by writing something local and Israeli, that's it's a very emotional story, but also has the war parts in it. Rutu was given a chance to write graphic novels for Drawn in Quarterly, and that's kind of where she evolved. And I think it's the same with all cultures. We do crave this because politics is very much a part of our lives, and comics is another way to get into the depths more than like the black and white of social media and news. And wait, I lost the question again. Something to do with that you are interested in the political story.
Yeah, but so well, it was more like a comment that actually what is getting out of Israel is something that has. It's very like you said about Rutu Modan being published first outside of Israel because of talking about something very close, very directly commenting about the war, which was in the news. All over
and
the world.
Michel Keshka with the story of his father and I think those are the stories I also relate to the most and inspire me the most. Specifically, myself as an artist, I failed to write them. I think it's a very difficult task and challenging task the most. To write about something real is oh wow, and that's why I think that being a reader of comics is more important aspect of my interest in comics than me being an artist, because those stories save me and they're part of my life more so than my own artistic practice, and those are the stories I want to read and create. I think there are a lot of there's so many amazing cartoonists that their work isn't getting out there, and just because of the lack of funding to make comics. I think it's just you need to both to travel outside of Israel to meet the publishers, to meet the festival, to meet the international community, and you need the time and luxury to create a book. And it's how most stories get missed. But there's so many amazing people. I think it's the same in all of the countries, that there's more unrealized stories than there are books.
For sure. If you go around talking to the people who are the independent artists who we have here around the tables, you will see that in Poland there was a moment when Kickstarter was launched. So public fund that really worked enormously well. We even have an exhibition of abortion hair stories, which was exactly funded like that. So this is a very direct message about what is happening politically now in Poland. So it is happening. I was just wondering how does it work for Israel? How do you do that, being a publisher but also being an independent artist, to publish? Because you say it's a tiny scene, right? You say it's a handful of people, but you have those books, right? You have those graphic novels. You have all of those illustrations. It looks very kind of business as usual to me when you think about indie comics.
Not so. because I studied and I worked, and I was also an assistant to a few American cartoonists, I saw that also you could say that American indie comics is a circus of people that all know each other because it's kind of a small community relative to the size of the US. But I did see that there is a separate profession. If you're a cartoonist, that's what you do full time. And if you're an illustrator, that's what you do full time. And you have different separate professional connections. In Israel, it's all mixed. Everyone that I know that is a cartoonist is actually an illustrator, and they teach art, and they are graphic designers, or they work like me in something unrelated, related a little bit, like a bookstore. The art schools in Israel are amazing. Every year, there may be 3 or 4 big art schools. Every year, 100 students graduate in the illustration and visual communication departments. Each and every one of these students I'm envious of their talent, and has a stylistic voice, and if I could give every one of these people funding to make a book, I'm sure there would be thousands and thousands of books. And what happens is every graduating year, like these 2 people here, who graduated last year, they come together, they put a comics anthology out, and then they form a group, and then that group kind of dissipates. I'm hoping for this gang of people that they'll stay and make books, but you can see like most of the anthologies are like groups of people that existed for maybe 2-3 years. They got together and they made an anthology, and then they went into their own careers, and and I brought these examples of books. The other thing, like you said, Kickstarter, there's a grant that you can get. It's not a grant that provides you with money while you work on it, like in Canada, but it's a grant for publishing the book. Printing the book. You get funding and you can print 500 copies of a graphic novel. So a lot of these graphic novels were given that grant. Again, it only
Which means you have to work on it on your own means, and then...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you have to have it.
Yeah. But in our micropress, and there are a few more micropresses like this one, it's called Salmon and Daughters. In our micropress, what our financial... we have no money, but I brought this example. It has 50 Israeli cartoonists, stories by 50 different people. We just publish very few books. That's our plan. I print out 50 copies. I sell those 50 copies at a festival or at a bookstore. I make no profit, but at least I return the money and I can publish 50 more. And the digital printing allows me to do this. It's not a great plan, and I actually lose money. I lose a little bit every time, so it's been a slow loss and leakage of money over the past 10 years. But I also don't plan to live forever. So I don't know. I think I also have, personally, I carry a very strong sense of nihilism. And I think the political, we all in Israel are kind of thinking that the world will end tomorrow anyway, so what the heck, let's just, no pension or stuff like that. And because I work in a bookstore, I have great access to the bookstore's resources. So specifically, I'm in a place where I can support artists by bringing their... And again, I'm only talking about 30 or 50 copies per book. But Omer Hoffman and Ilan Noam are 2 cartoonists I work with, and they edit these. And they see it as a project that encourages people, shakes them down and says, hey, you have talent, please make a comic, we'll publish it. And we really kind of, but it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. and we do it because our teachers did the same for us. I had amazing teachers and amazing mentors that like the publishers of my graphic novels in the US, that said exactly the same to me. We'll help you. And they can't pay me funding because it's weird stuff and it's not commercial and not, it's like, it doesn't appeal to enough to constitute funding. But they give me the space and the support, and this work wouldn't have been created without that. So I think it's something of the comics community that we want people to be creating it. Unlike, I guess, the fine art world, where it's, I get the feeling that everybody wants there to be, there's a lot of competition, and it's either him or her, and there's one gallery space, and everybody's fighting for the same space. I think people who are in comics, our biggest, what I want is that there will be more comics. And so it's in our interest to encourage it wherever we can. So it's a combination of being very stupid and bad at math. And Iran, my husband, who is co-publishing this with me, along with Daniel Oz, is a mathematician. But on purpose, I am the head of the company because I don't know maths. And if he saw my calculations, he would close it down immediately. That's how it works.
So you have no access to it.
Yeah.
We still have a little bit of time. And do you have any questions? I mean, we have publishers in here. We have readers. Anybody? I'll get you a mic. I'll translate it. Not really. Well, but I think if you go around, you will see that, from what I heard, our publishing for comic books, especially the not superhero ones, that works just like that. I mean, we can really relate to that. And but you know what makes it rolling really is also the readers. So you've been talking a lot about the artistic community of creators. What about readers? People who really just come out of whatever else, not academia, not art school, but they just read.
No, they're only the for alternative comics. It's only people from art school.
It's impossible.
Only, yeah. And I mean, I know two people who are collect this stuff that are not, but they also, but because they collect alternative comics because they also collect the mainstream stuff, and they're such big collectors and fans of the medium that they want the full scope. And the other problem is, I think it's just a matter of time. I think Israel is, in a sense, maybe 20 to 30 years behind the States. There three of the main comic shops are in one city in Tel Aviv. I think last year one opened that has it's called the Dying Lake, that brings really cool stuff. I like the comics shops, but it's not enough. I think most of how I found this field is by just wandering around into a comic shop in New York and discovering all of the little zines. And I think it's a really big problem in Israel because it's a claustrophobic existence. We're surrounded by enemy states. We're surrounded by sea. Importing is very, very expensive. There's also a cultural boycott, the BDS, which I am both for and against at the same time. I'll maybe take a note on this because it's important. I think it's important to have BDS because, again, it tells you there is something urgent going on, and it's more important than culture. It's life and death of people. But I also think, and I see the results of it as an educator in Israel, that cultural boycott of any kind just does the opposite effect. It creates a more xenophobic and right-wing society in return. That's why, and I also think that it's important for all political ideas to exist, it has to exist and not exist at the same time for things to shape other, like the thesis, antithesis, synthesis or whatever to form a revolution. That's just a side note. But that's the reason why we can't get comics festivals, international guests, books like these. The only books that you can get imported are books with spines. And places like Desert Island in New York, where there's handmade books which which cause everybody to fall in love with the medium, they don't exist. And it's very hard to, and only if you have money to travel, and you're lucky enough to be able to travel to European comics festivals, then you have access to all this stuff. And so the readership is art school people, because people in art school are well versed in this world. They research this world a lot, and they actively search online, and they fall in love with the medium. But to have a readership, it's a thing of literacy. You need to. The first time I picked up a Chris Ware novel, I couldn't read it, and I put it down, and I could only read it 5 years later after I was versed in visual literacy. It's something that needs to be taught. My parents can't read my books. My parents don't understand what I'm doing. They can't read anything. They don't know what it is, and it's terrible. I think my only hope is that, and I like the fact that I work in a bookstore because I really see this process, is that only now mainstream comics even, is getting translated for young readers, 9 to 12, people like Raina Talgmeyer are getting translated into Hebrew, Bone, and those young readers, the children that read those will become readers of comics later in life, and hopefully creators, but at least readers. I really have to struggle with parents who walk into my bookstore and, sorry, it's not mine. I only work there, but I like to fantasize that it's fine. Who walk into the bookstore and they tell me, could you recommend anything for my 9-year-old? And I pull out the comics and they say, no, something real. and I have to bite my lip, and I try my best to say that it's real. It's just a different way of thinking. And another thing is the cost. It's a very expensive. A comic is a very expensive thing to own, and paper printing gets more expensive every year. And our only hope is libraries like this, which is why I'm super excited to see this library, because I hope for it to become a thing in Israel. There's a new comics library in Tel Aviv right now, led by Gabi Tartakovsky, but it's also something new. It's only from this year, so it will take about a generation until...
Oh, this took just several years, so
Yeah.
it will be faster. We have a question. Wait, because it won't record if I don't give a mic.
Problem of mentality, that's the older generation just doesn't accept the comics, or how does it work? And for example, kids books, how do they look like? Are they about mystical world, magic, or like kids books in Israel, how do they look like? Are they about real stuff only, or about magic things, creature, dragons,
Oh.
So can you translate?
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
Yeah. What I meant by real is a real book, not necessarily a realistic
okay,
content.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
we want a real book, meaning
book.
prose.
Okay.
I think kids culture in Israel is actually, it is very prominent, because also there are a lot of children in Israel because of the religious there's
Religious
like
aspect,
it's part of the religion of Jewish people to have a lot of kids.
Demographic in
Yeah,
Israel is
demographic,
very
yeah.
special. That the people like very religious, they have a lot of kids,
Exactly.
while people that aren't that religious, they have only a little bit of kids. So over time, you have actually more religious folks in the nation, and they taking like more space everywhere.
Exactly.
So,
The demographic thing is is part of the reason that the country is becoming more and more a theocracy rather than democracy, and also more right-wing, because the liberal or also my peers, I can say 90% of my peers don't have kids. It's a combination of not seeing a future, not being able to pay to afford
if you're artist, it's difficult, right?
Yeah. For me, it's either comics or a kid. I need to choose, and also it's a real demographic war, and no one wants to be a part of a war. It's crazy. The government is encouraging giving birth by giving grants, and it's very weird. But what I'm saying is that there are a lot of children to cater to, and a lot of books, and also even my peers who do have kids. It's their future. They would do anything for their kid. I think that's it's not something specific to Israel. I think any parent would do anything for their kids. So children's books do get a lot of spotlight. Although I can say, as an illustrator, I would never, ever, ever illustrate a children's book in Israel, because the terms are. It's less than minimum wage. It's terrible. But it's a place where there are some books that are created there. There are really, really amazing books and illustrators and authors. But in terms of what was the first part of your question? Yeah.
But also, what types of are there, right, for kids? What is it about?
Oh.
And since you mentioned that the illustrated books can be totally awesome, I always struggle with understanding why there is no continuum for the parents, because for the kids it's there for sure.
Yeah.
Between illustrated books, and then what's the difference? I can go from illustrated books to less illustrations, or to more illustrations and comics. Why not?
Yeah, I think. Oh, and you were asking about the generational thing. I think that I can see this also since I started working in a bookstore. I am reading more prose than I do comics in the past 3 years, and I see how it helps me. I think I can only assume, because I don't really know and I haven't researched this. But from the readers in the bookstore who I meet every day, you need a book. They ask for books that are large. They don't want to read short stories. They want a 300-page narrative. They want to dive in. They want it as an escape. They want it to process. There's so much noise and so much despair, and they need a character they can identify with. And my mother and my father read a lot, but they would never, even if I tell them, this is an amazing comic, you'll read it and you'll cry. I cried when I read it, and I think comics can tell just as deep of a story it is. But I think for people who don't draw themselves, like my parents or something, like there's only so much that you can go into a comic. I'm speaking about in very broad terms, like this is the sense that I'm getting for readers. For me, when I read a comic, there's the aspect of getting drawn into the story, learning something new, getting lost in this world, but also I look at it and I learn something about my own practice. I take it apart, I reverse engineer it, I look at the structure, I can analyze the drawings, I can become envious. There's like more I can put into it and take from the book. And people who I serve in the bookstore don't have money for comics. It's expensive, and when they want their money's worth, and they also want the most immersive experience they can find. It's a real need, and I think that's why the readership is mostly people who are artistic. And I think the jump from illustrations are more when they buy an illustrated book, they buy it as a gift for someone that's like nice to put on the coffee table. Illustration has its limits, and I think it has its limits only because there isn't enough discourse around it. It comes to that there are not enough reporters who write about comics. There's not enough of critical writing or researchers about comics. They don't have. We haven't articulated the potential enough in outside of art schools or art academias. This is my hypothesis. I bet someone else would give you a different answer, but yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry, but we have to cut.
Sure, yeah.
And we have the next guest upcoming. Thank you for the talk. It was extremely interesting. And now, are you going to sign your comic books?
Yeah, they're giving out
yes, and we have the
for free. It's about my the puppetry school that I go to.
And it's beautiful. It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you, Alexander, for inviting me so much. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.